It's 1781 and the American Revolutionary War is coming to a close. After a siege that has lasted nearly a year, British troops are closing in on the defenders of Yorktown. Things are looking grim for the Americans. And although their French allies have arrived, it might not be enough to save them. But then something miraculous happens. British General Charles Cornwallis throws his sword down and declares he gives up. The war is over before it even begins. How did this happen? Well, let's find out. Let's explore the alternate history of a failed rebellion. The year is 1765, and things are really starting to pick up steam in the American colonies. The French and Indian War has just come to an end, and Britain is deep in debt. King George II wants to get that money back, and who better to help him do it than the 13 colonies of North America? They had benefited greatly from the war, so it's only fair they pay something back, right? The colonists didn't see it that way, and they were about to show it. In May, news spread through the colonies that the British government had passed the Stamp Act, which would require them to purchase special stamped paper for every legal document they signed, including newspapers. This wasn't exactly what the colonists wanted to hear, and protests began immediately. In October, 9 colonial delegates met in the city of Stamp Act Congress. They declared that since the act violated their rights as Englishmen, it would boycott all British goods until the tax was repealed. The British government listened, repealed the tax, and everybody lived happily ever after. The end. Just kidding. This was only the beginning. And although the Stamp Act was eventually repealed, 2 more acts soon took its place. The Townshend Acts. These new laws put taxes on all kinds of goods, including tea, and enforced them with the help of British soldiers stationed in the colonies. Tensions grew, and in June 1769, violence erupted when British soldiers fired on a group of Boston protesters, killing 5. The event became known as the Boston Massacre, and propaganda spread across the colonies. Soon, revolutionary fervor had reached a boiling point. On December 16, 1773, members of the Sons of Liberty snuck onto merchant ships docked at the Boston harbor and dumped 92,000 pounds of British tea into the water. The British government responded by passing the Coercive Acts, or the Intolerable Acts as they were known in America. These acts closed the port of Boston, placed the Massachusetts government under military rule, and allowed British soldiers to be tried in England instead of the colonies. The colonists were furious. In September 1774, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. There, they organized a boycott of British goods and created the Continental Association to enforce it. By the end of 1774, revolutionary groups like the Sons of Liberty and the Committees of Correspondence were spreading the message of independence to every corner of the colonies. A sense of unity had formed amongst the people, and it wouldn't be long before that resulted in armed rebellion. In April 1775, fighting broke out between British troops and American militiamen at Lexington and Concord. Within a month, the Second Continental Congress had met in Philadelphia. Their main purpose was to coordinate the war effort. On June 1775, they voted to create the Continental Army, effectively kicking off the American Revolutionary War. The early years of the war were tough on the Americans. While they had the support of most colonists, the British had a much better trained and equipped army. The British also had one massive advantage: their navy. Britain was a naval powerhouse and controlled the seas around North America. This made supplying the American colonies extremely difficult. Because of this, the Continental Army often went without food and supplies, forcing them to abandon their posts and head home. The war was not going well, and some in the South actually wanted to make a deal with the British. In 1776, a group of loyalists from South Carolina met with British officials in the city of Savannah to discuss the possibility of peace. They offered the British 3: representation in Parliament, increased self-governance in the colonies, and, most importantly, slavery. The British government was very interested in this offer, but before anything could be signed, word got out and Southern patriots rose up and put the Loyalist delegation to an end. However, the war was going badly, and many Southerners began to wonder if the peace treaty was a good idea. To make matters worse, news arrived that the British had taken the city of New York. With their biggest city now in British hands, the Southern colonies felt more vulnerable than ever. It seemed the best chance for peace might have been right there in Savannah, and now it was too late. In July 1776, the Continental Congress voted to declare independence. The following month, the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired in the South. British General Sir Henry Clinton had captured the city of Charleston and was marching inland toward the capital of South Carolina, hoping to win over the disaffected Southern colonies. But the Americans had other plans. At the Battle of Camden, the Continental Army fought back against the British, defeating them and pushing them back to the coast. However, the battle came at a cost. General Horatio Gates was severely wounded and unable to lead the army in future battles. At the First Battle of Cowpens, British Brigadier General William W. Tarleton took advantage of this and decisively defeated the Continental Army. His victory was a turning point in the war, one that would lead to the fall of the Southern colonies. After their defeat at Cowpens, the Americans retreated to the frontier of the Carolina backcountry, where they set up a base at a fort in the wilderness. This would be their last stand. As the British advanced on the fort, the Americans knew they couldn't hold out forever. So they sent messengers to the Cherokee and Iroquois nations, asking for their support. The natives agreed and launched surprise attacks on the British flanks. But these attacks weren't enough. On February 1781, British troops entered the fort and the surviving Americans fled into the wilderness. From here, the British marched north to Virginia, where they captured the capital at Richmond. With the Southern colonies now in their control, Britain was poised to finish the war once and for all. But then something strange happened. British General Charles Cornwallis threw his sword down and declared he gives up. The war is over before it even begins. How did this happen? Well, the answer is simple. Britain never even attacked the fort. Why? Because by the time they got there, the Americans were already gone. You see, while the British were busy capturing cities in the South, a small group of American troops, led by Lieutenant Colonel William Washington, were clearing out British supply depots. When the British arrived at the fort, they found that everything had been destroyed and the Americans were nowhere to be seen. In fact, the entire Continental Army was gone. Earlier that year, American General George Washington had realized that he couldn't beat the British in open battle, so he came up with a plan to force them out of America. He planned to march his troops south and lay siege to Yorktown, where he knew a large group of British troops were stationed. But Washington needed help to do this, and he knew just where to find it. By 1780, the American colonies had become a true melting pot of cultures. Many European immigrants had come to fight for American independence, including the Polish, who sent over 2,000 soldiers to assist the Americans. And the Frenchman Marquis de Lafayette had become one of America's best generals. Washington knew these foreign troops would be key to winning the war, and he asked France for their support. They agreed, and a combined American-French force of nearly 20,000 troops set out for Yorktown. When the British heard this, they panicked. They knew they couldn't win a battle against this force, so they retreated to the safety of Yorktown. Here, British General Charles Cornwallis dug in and prepared to defend the town. He knew that if he could just hold out until reinforcements arrived, he would win the war. But those reinforcements never came. As the weeks went on, the British grew weaker and weaker. Supplies dwindled and disease ran rampant through the troops. By October, the situation was dire. Cornwallis sent a letter to Washington offering to surrender. The two met in a field outside the town to discuss the terms. Washington accepted the offer and the British surrendered. The war was over. But this isn't the end of the story. You see, back in Philadelphia, news of the surrender at Yorktown was met with great celebration. People danced in the streets, fireworks lit up the sky, and church bells rang out across the city. For many Americans, the war was finally over and they had won. But for others, the war was far from finished. British troops were still stationed in America, and thousands of loyalists were living in fear of what might happen next. In the coming years, these loyalists would flee to Canada and Britain, taking their wealth and knowledge with them. This would be a major blow to the new nation, but it was a price they would have to pay if they wanted to win the war. The United States of America had officially been born. But what would the country look like? Without the influx of colonists from Britain, the U.S. might look a lot different today. Instead of having 50 states, we might only have the original 13. Without the population to support westward expansion, we might not have any states west of the Mississippi River. And without the industrialization brought over by British immigrants, the U.S. might still be an agrarian society. But that's just a theory, because in this timeline, Britain never surrendered and the Americans lost the Revolutionary War. The United States of America would not exist, and we would likely still be British citizens today. Thank you for watching Parallelish, and remember, don't be a John Hancock. Support the Redcoats. I'm Nova, your guide through the unknown. Want to explore more timelines? Tap the playlist above and keep diving into the what-ifs. Until next time, stay curious.